Welcome once again to Print Island and to the Lighthouse. I am Richard Askam, the Lighthouse Keeper, as you now know, and it is my job, I think, and in fact my responsibility to stand on top of this lighthouse and look at the world with a 360-degree view and occasionally invite guests into my lighthouse who might have a slightly different view. And I think it's important that we have lots of different views on Print Island. So today, I'm very fortunate to be joined by Mark Subers and Chris Curran. Gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are.
Good morning, Richard. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. And Mark, as you can see, has taken the trouble of going on location to Print Island today. Either that or it's the best digital backdrop I've ever seen.
On my glasses. It's awfully bright here, so.
Well, as we're
going to have some palm trees in the back, but we ended up with some thunderstorms, so you didn't get.
Well, it's a tropical island, Chris. The weather can happen, so yeah, that's no problem. But listen, thank you both for taking the time today. If there's anybody in the world, and I'm sure there isn't, that doesn't know who the hell you are, why don't you introduce each other and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Okay, Chris, want me to go first? Yeah, so
go for it.
Mark Subers. I hope people know me. I've been on enough videos like this over the last few years. But so my background is I started with NAPCO Media side of Pretty United Alliance. So that's the media brands 14 years ago and ran that for a bit. Jumped over to events when we merged as Pretty United Alliance. And now I've been moved over to a chief innovation role, which is, I think kind of go find new ways to support the industry and make some revenue to that end. So that's my new gig.
Great stuff. Chris.
Terrific. Well, I'm actually following in Mark's footsteps. I'm now responsible for the operations of our expo, but I'm also responsible for all of the media that we produce and the content that we produce, as well as our micro shows. So we also have micro events where we do 300 to 500 people on a much smaller platform, much more succinct than you would with the expo, which is completely different animal. But Mark started off as an innovation officer in that regard too. He was very creative in building the show, but now it's come over to our team, which is great. I'm a printer by nature, Richard. So, coming into the events is really from an experiential perspective for me. I've been on both the printer side. Ironically, you're from the UK. I worked on the Queen Elizabeth II earlier in my career and ran their print shop at sea, which was a lot of fun. But then I also went to the equipment side and the OEM side and worked for great companies like Heidelberg and Landa and HP. And it was only when I met Mark and his team and they were talking about building this amazing show that I said, okay, now's the time to go over to the other side and really give back and contribute to what the members need and what printers need to make themselves successful. So, I'm a printer first, which I think is lends itself. Mark also comes from the industry as well. We look at things as you want the industry to look at things. What's the experience like for the attendee? What's the experience like for an exhibitor? And I think that's really fueled the evolution of what we're trying to do. So I'm pleased to be a part of it. This just, I hope this is the last part of my career where I get to really give back and then watch Pretty United continue to grow.
Fabulous. And that really, in that sort of intro there, Chris, highlights the purpose and the point of Print Island. And this started for me, just so you know, 7 years ago in a speech that I gave at a print show in Brussels, where I imagined that the entire industry lived on an island. It just didn't know it. And it knew everybody on the island. And as a result of knowing and speaking to everybody on the island, it had the misconception that it was actually speaking to the rest of the world. But in essence, it was talking to itself. 7 years on, still trying to see whether that's changed. So we brought back Print Island as a really a global content destination for the whole industry. So I'm sort of happy that it now lives on that island as long as it broadcasts externally. So you just mentioned in your intro there, Chris, that you've come from lots of different sides of the industry, and therein I think lies part of the problem is that the industry is enormous. So when we talk about print as if it's one thing, but the reality is it's probably a dozen things. It might even be 24 things. How do both of you see, given that problem, and I notice you both nodding, so there's a sense of agreement with what I'm talking about. How do you both see a way round that particular problem so that the rest of the world, the rest of the commercial world, gets a sense of just how good the print industry is? Mark, to you first.
Wow, I was going to hope that Chris went first on this one. So,
Yeah.
now, look, it's always a challenge. And Richard, you and I have had conversations, over the past 7 years, probably since you first originated this and talking about the island and the challenges on the island. I do think that, one of the things that we're doing as the Alliance that has some connective tissue to it is the G7 Plus color standard. So when we're doing something at Expo, we're gathering everyone together and we're trying to put the brands, the printers, and the OEMs and the color experts all together. And I think that's part of how do we tether ourselves, or how do we get that boat off the island? Well, we get the brands involved, right? And we allow them to see what it is that we do as an industry, because we do there. We call it an echo chamber a lot, right? And I do think sometimes we are talking to ourselves, and we're pleased with what we say to each other, yet somehow it doesn't really permeate out, off the island itself. So that's one of the ways, but it's certainly a challenge. We talk a lot about equipment and what it can do, and speeds and feeds and things of that nature, and we don't really get to that, like, well, how does this impact the brand? Where does print stand in their full marketing plan? And it's really important that we do support that, and we've done it in a multitude of ways. But that right now, that's the G7 Plus is something that comes to mind specifically.
Yeah.
And Chris, just to follow on from that, Chris, sorry, and throw in a little bit of extra with Mark's response there, and I think again there's a microcosm going on here, isn't there? The different departments, if you like, of the industry, very good at talking to each other, very pleased with what they say and hear, as you say. But are they as aware that you know them to be, or that you think them to be, of the need for that external get off the island conversation?
I think they are starting to become aware, and they're actually using the Printing United Alliance platform to make larger inroads with their entire ecosystem. What Mark is talking about is the G7 Plus exchange, which is for the first time going to happen at Printing United Expo the day before. And the theme is united by color, right? Because if you think about some of the things in the printing space, there are some universal languages that go outside of just production. So for a brand owner, it's like, how do you represent my color? How do you ensure the repeatability of what's important to us from a brand? So there are pockets of those kinds of conversations that take place that allow the brand owner, the creative, pre-press production, or even the OEM manufacturer of the print production devices to have some vocabulary that they're all interested in making sure that they're all looking at it the same way. G7 is a great example of that. When you were asking that question, I was thinking back to, when I took a little break from the printing industry, I would say a little break, I had the opportunity to produce products in China. And we had opened up 9 factories throughout the coastal communities of China. And one of the products we made was a very American product, an Adirondack chair. It had this beautiful 7-color print process on the back of this chair. But the plant didn't care. The plant was making a chair, and printing was part of the process. And yet for me, the person who was procuring all of the chairs, the best part of the entire process was the printing. So different people have different relationships with products. And, if I take it to another segment of the print or the Printing United Expo, industrial printing is made by printers within a plant that make pumps and gadgets and all kinds of performance related labels, but they don't think of themselves as printers. So really, I think one of the things that Printing United has allowed us to do is manifest live on a show floor all these different pockets of wide format printing and industrial printing and commercial printing, where you and I open up a package, we kind of take it for granted that there's a folding carton and there's some instructions and there's a security tag on the back. And then when you look at the product, there's all kinds of circuitry that's been printed inside. Opening people's eyes up to what we have in common live on the floor over the last 5 years is really one of the things that's driving the growth of these conversations across all these different segments.
And I'm going to come back to the missing part of that conversation in a second, because I think it's quite critical. But what you've just described, and it just triggered a thought in my head, we talk about the printing industry. So let's talk about the industrial part of the printing industry, and the feelings and the behaviours that industry engenders. Let's use the auto industry as the example of what I'm talking about. If ever you talk to a mechanic, a car mechanic, he's very interested, or she's very interested, to tell you how the engine works, and because it's something that they love. Whereas if you talk to the driver of the car, they're only interested that the engine works. So when they turn the key or push the button, on it comes and away they go. So there is this sort of phasing issue between the love of how something's made and what it is that you've actually made. And you highlighted it beautifully there, Chris. So the missing piece of this conversation then, in many ways, is the end consumer. Because even though you've added the brand in there as an extra part of this conversation, the brand to a certain extent still lives on the island. Everybody else doesn't live on the island, doesn't recognize the brilliance and the innovation that can happen within the print industry, because when they hear the word print, they see newspapers, they see magazines. So I'll repeat the question, but slightly differently. How do we communicate to the end user along that chain, that supply chain, that actually print is a million different things?
Yeah. I think that people communicate to the consumers the wrong way, right? Unfortunately, they only notice it when it's wrong. So how many times have you looked at an industrial piece of equipment outside of your home, and the label where you're looking for some information has been bleached out by the sun, right? Or the instructions on the back of an oil container have been smeared by the petroleum product that's inside. Or maybe you go to the grocery store and bring something home, and something has failed in the sealing of the flexible packaging, and it tastes terrible, or it's freezer burned or something. Those are the kinds of things that you actually point out that somebody didn't know what they were doing. The expertise was missing from the equation. When people don't notice in the consumer world, I think that speaks volumes to the expertise of all the engineers, all the substrates and the formulations that go into this science that we call printing. It's the failures that highlight the successes, unfortunately, most of the time. And I think that getting onto the show floor, I keep coming back to this live experience on the show floor. Is where those tough questions are answered. You're talking to the scientists who have built this chemical or this coating or this print attribute to the pigmentation, and you can really understand how it manifests into the applications because they're showing them to you.
And Mark, on the subject of shows, and I will bring you to your core topic at some point, I promise. We're just wandering around the island at the moment. One of the biggest shows in the world that happens, I think, every January is the Consumer Electronics Show. It used to be in Vegas. I'm not sure whether it's still there. But there's a magic word in there: consumer. So is there a case with this dysfunctional communication chain that we've got to the end user of having a consumer print show?
That's really interesting. I think, and I hate to say it, like Chris sort of alluded to, sometimes the consumers don't see it and don't care, right? Unless there wasn't print and you go in the grocery store and just everything's white, which, I've seen some of those videos before, and it's like the world without print. Okay. So how do you explain to consumers that there are no road signs? There is no Diet Coke. Okay, there's just a silver can. Okay, and I don't, that's such a hard connection point. Like Chris said, they see it when it fails, but they never see it otherwise. Except for some of the exceptional branding. But, and I hate to say it, but I go out to restaurants and I'm in supermarkets and what have you, and my wife's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm smelling the menu, and I'm loving the menu. And well, how was this printed? How was it coded? Oh, look at that! It's and she's like, "Oh my God, you're crazy, right?" But that's the world we live in. We're constantly looking for it. Look, we actually had very close ties to Consumer Electronics Show. We did had some consumer electronic brands in NAPCO Media. We ended up selling them off to focus a little bit more on the core. We do know Shapiro, who runs the show. Be a very interesting thing to try to get some sense of. Look, we've thought about this before. Even with our Pack Expo friends. is there a print pavilion? Because those, Pack Expo is a little bit more about, filling the containers, the things that, and Chris, you can probably articulate it better than I do, but it's adjacent to our printing,
Sure.
right? It includes it, but we provide the printed boxes and flex, and they fill it. Okay, with so it is definitely adjacent. I know they've given a shot sometimes at printing pavilions,
Okay.
and I don't think it's so much about HP or Canon or Ricoh or the brand. It's just like, here's what's available to you. Okay, let's not talk about equipment. It's not about that. It's like, how can you enhance your product by some of the new print technologies that are available to you? And that's always the kind of angle that I was looking at it. And Chris and I've had this conversation before. How do we go up and down, right? The value chain, and make sure everyone knows almost not so much the pretty pictures that we can, create, but the value of some embellishments. And now, obviously some of the high end, markets get that, right? So perfumes and cosmetics, etc. They understand embellishments. They understand high end packaging, right? It's really, the packaging costs a lot more than the actual perfume itself, which is really interesting. But sometimes that falls a little short on the frozen pizza, right? It's just, it's the printing's not great, et cetera, et cetera. So, Chris, I don't know if you've got any additional thoughts on that.
Yeah, I do. Look, I think there's a place for the consumers to have a conversation here, but I think it's going to be a little while until we get there, right? So if you look at where Printing United started, it was pretty much wide format and apparel, right? And then the team at SGIA, which was the original name of the nonprofit, met Mark, and they had a walk around the island, and really came up with the idea of something much broader. Let's add some segmentation to what you guys are already doing. And it was really following the democratization of production equipment, right? So digital kind of brought down, I would say, a technology that can be more widely used. But then those digital pieces of technology became Swiss Army knives, where they weren't just making, let's just use a regular example. They weren't just making pocket folders. They were able to do 5 other commercial applications. So they weren't just making labels. They were able to do 5 other label and packaging applications. So, when we watched the industry expand the expo expand segment by segment by segment, and then we watched our iLearning platform expand segment by segment by segment. Now we're branching out into other things. We have regulatory department within our organization that helps people understand, what does the law say you need to do inside your printing plant. We have human resources and legal department, where they're helping you understand, well, how do you treat your employees, and what are the different nuances between different parts of the geography of particularly America, that you need to be aware of in your part of the world. Now we have a research division that has 5 full-time staff, right? So we're now inviting people from different pockets of the industry before to an event where it used to just be the production people or the owners that would come see the new equipment and things like that. Now we really have a place and a conversation for your human resources department, your financial department, your legal department, your production people, your pre-press people, and yes, the owner, who has to sign off on all these great things that people want to invest in. But now we're using color and bringing that into the show to bring the brands to the table, so that we have a conversation with the creatives who are responsible for brand owners. So I think the next evolution could certainly be the client's client. And then, of course, the end consumer. But I think it'll be in small pockets, just like the rest of the things that we've grown, where it might take some user groups, it might take some experiences, and then the experience will grow to a platform, and then the platform will grow to something larger. So I see it as a natural progression, but I think it's going to take a few years.
Yeah, I agree, and it's quite interesting listening to you describe what's now on offer, and this is why I wanted to get you guys with me on the Lighthouse today, because actually what we described at the start of the call was the problem with the industry is it's too many things, and the communication problem is, how do you boil that down into one thing that somebody can understand? The answer is you can't. So in many ways you can't solve the problem in its current methodology. So that the only way to solve it is to change the methodology. And this is what I love about Printing United Alliance, really, is that not only have you recognized the need to talk to different people in different ways in order to get them to the same point, largely, because the value chain isn't that broad in many ways, but it does have quite a lot of different endpoints, and a lot of people need to be able to see the value in that value chain, not just the cost. We'll save that for another day. But I think, and to get you both really onto the trade show, almost debate, really, because I don't think trade show does it justice anymore. I don't think it's a trade show. I think it's an industry showcase of what's available around the world from all of those multiple partners and stakeholders brought together in a relatively small space, although it's not small, for a few days to try and explain it. Is that really the direction of travel now, do you think, for Printing United?
I think you hit the nail on the head. There are still trade shows out there. Don't get me wrong. I think one of the things that we set out to do was not just build another trade show, right? We started with a trade show, but the vision was to build something that was community driven. On our board of directors and everybody who influences, our strategic actions on a day-to-day basis, the printers and their suppliers. And that's by design. There's a lot of organizations that were either run by printers or run by suppliers. And then there's other organizations that are publicly traded companies who have a very different idea of what it means to put on a show, right? So, there I think is the uniqueness of what we've tried to do here, is to create this community experience that is much more beyond a trade show. And when I do get clients who call me and be like, oh, these trade shows are expensive, I'm like, because you're thinking about it as a trade show. You have got to stop thinking about it as a demonstration of equipment. And it's really the equipment and how it touches the rest of the ecosystem, your personnel, their clients, their value propositions. All of that needs to be there for the taking, because you never know who's going to show up at these shows. There was just, let's call it a little over 10,000 people once attending trade shows. This organization's grown to this show. Last year was 25,000 registrants. We're well outpacing that this year by double-digit percentages year over year. So we're pretty excited about that. I think it's catching on. There's something to be said by, I'll share something with you. The other day I was watching a baseball game. I love watching my hometown, Philadelphia Phillies, even though I live in the South now. And I was watching one of their star players get interviewed, and he was talking about the fact that he's been around for a long time. He's very good. He's one of the best on the team. And he was talking about bad habits that he falls into because sometimes he thinks within his own head. Or he forgets the finesse of why he became great. And he said, I'm always working with coaches, and I'm always watching other players, not just on my team, but I'm watching other players on other teams. I'm seeing how they do things versus how I do things. He said, I was great when I was a kid, and I was great when I was in college. He said, but I didn't get really great until I became a professional ball player, because I have to look outside of my comfort zone because I pick up bad habits. I don't know the best ways to do things. And I think that lends itself to the show, right? So if I see more on the show floor, or if I see more as a professional baseball player, I'm going to score more, right? So I think that same mentality for business owners is what we're trying to get across on the show floor. Is it's not just one piece of equipment anymore. It's the entire business and how it can thrive inside of the community conversations that take place there.
Yeah,
and I'm going to extend that metaphor one step further for you, Mark, into the world of Wayne Gretzky, and because it does seem to me, just listening to you both today, that you're skating to where the puck's going to be.
100%.
Yeah, I would just add to Chris. Yes, we are always, I think that's, hopefully one of the strengths that I bring to the organization is, like, Dave's like, where do you think of this stuff? I'm like, I don't know. It's just the way my very right brain, very left-handed right brain. These ideas, some good, some not so good, tend to pop in my head on a fairly frequent basis. We're always trying to guess, where's the puck going to be? Okay, we see the tea leaves, we can read them, and now where do we need to go? But to add to what Chris said, and how we think about the expo, which might be a little bit differentiating. to a certain degree is we're really trying to be an open platform, okay, and involve everyone because everyone needs to be part of the conversation. So, we've got, 40, I think we're up to 40 media partners, Chris, around the world, and we have a media company. We don't care. We're inviting other people. We are an association. We invite all the other associations. We work with them, give them boosts. You have to be part of the conversation. Join us, join them. We want you to be in touch and in tune with the whole industry. FESPA reached out. Hey, can we have some space? Of course you can. Okay, we want you to be there. You're a global, player, especially in Europe. Come on over. You're part of the conversation. So for those 3 days, we're really trying to create an environment and a platform that is, just holistic, and the networking is really pretty incredible, and our ability to help, provide an opportunity for people to connect the dots. And then one other thing, which was kind of interesting, which I kind of forgot about, Chris, I know recently, and I don't put you on the spot, but I know you recently reviewed this. We actually have quite a few brands, Richard, that come to the event. Okay, I know Apple jumps out to me, Chris. I know you recently looked at that. Can you rattle off a few more of the top brands that come to the show, which is kind of exciting? You talk about connecting the dots back, hopefully to their consumers and how they think about engineering, how they think about the world of print as it relates to their consumers and their clients. Who else, Chris? Sorry, I have to put you on the spot, but
that's all right. Look, we've had a plethora of brands. The challenge is that a lot of people don't know who they are. So if you think about Church and Dwight, who owns thousands of consumer brands in the home, both here and in Europe, you would never know who they are. The same thing could go for the Frito-Lay Pepsi organization. Like, Frito-Lay and Pepsi, but you don't know the 400 other brands that are on the store shelves. We've had Sunbeam there, which is a conglomerate. I think if you look at any major mega store and look at the brands that are replicated there, Apple included, right? Fun fact, Apple has their own implant, and their implant manager comes to the show. So, you've got the brand owners who don't even know that there's a whole other department that's coming to the show in these massive organizations, right? So, those are just a few, but there are dozens and dozens of large brand organizations that come from the engineering perspective, from the substrate perspective. We had a major brand come who was solely responsible for sustainability. So I think people are looking at this platform as the place where they can, I wouldn't say play in the sandbox, because for me, it's playing in the sandbox because I'm a printer. It's what I do. But for a lot of people, it's a place where they can start to connect the dots, because it's not just a secular conversation about one part of the business. If I only went to, I'll use a coatings show as an example, right? Or fluids show. All I'm going to get to talk about is the fluids and how they interact with potentially a substrate and potentially the environment. If I come to Printing United and I talk to the fluids person, I'm going to be able to have that conversation and pull somebody in from Canon, for example, and talk about their new label technology that they're working on with a acquisition they made with eDale, and say, hey, how does this coating work with your print product, and how does the print product perform once that's done in your converting product? So the end-to-end solution is something that you're able to do on our experience versus, I think, other smaller shows. And I'm not taking away from going to a show where you know what's going to be talked about, the OEMs that are going to be there, and the experts that are going to be on site, because you have a laser focus on one particular application. Those shows are important, I believe, right, for a certain discipline. But I also believe that there's an opportunity for, net new growth for people, net new applications, net new experimentation, net new equipment, and potentially even net new suppliers that you can partner with in a place where the entire community is represented versus just one small segment.
I think typically the only fluids conversation I have at trade shows is with the bartender, but we'll save that for another day. But you make a really interesting point there, Chris, about, and this is where I suppose brands in many ways is too big a word, because you have the conglomerates that you mentioned that own the retail brands, and the products that sit beneath those are the products that sit on the shelf. So from a consumer perspective, you're seeing a very small touch point. Frito-Lay, for example, you're seeing a very small touch point of a huge conglomerate. So for the industry, you want to connect with the the conglomerate, and from a consumer, they want to connect with the product. And you mentioned Apple. We've been raving, haven't we, since Sir Jonathan Ive created a box that went like that, covered in print. Nobody ever mentioned that. They only ever mentioned, oh, look out, the unboxing that's become a thing. So I guess maybe the speed of evolution of our own behavior as consumers is making that communication gap even harder, because it's changing all the time. And how we bridge that, Mark, is, I think it's probably impossible.
Yeah, like I said, we've talked ways around it, but yeah, it's a very difficult challenge. I do think that looking at potential partners in that chain, like I said, could it be CES? That we get a little closer. Again, sometimes I just like, when I go to a restaurant with my wife, she doesn't care about the menu; she just wants to order. Right? I'm looking at it, but
she's hungry.
She's hungry, wants to order food. Or order the specialty cocktail, and it's like looking at the menus, and I just I geek out on this stuff because that's what we're involved in. But yeah, it's an interesting challenge, and I think, like Chris said, step by step, getting the brands involved is a really, really great way for us to get this conversation. And like Chris said, if we can work with our exhibitors to ensure they're having broader conversations, and being, and just, hey, just because somebody walks up and they might have, in the case of, on the promotional, side, or on the apparel side, just because they're wearing shorts and, flip flops and a t-shirt doesn't mean they're not looking to buy your equipment. Okay. It doesn't mean they don't want to have a conversation with you. So I think it's, generally speaking, everyone has to be with a very open mind. We're a multi-segment show. We really cover all the technologies. And as you said, it spans quite a bit. And even in the early, sort of, goings that we had, the commercial folks were very buttoned up, suits, ties, and we've learned to, like, bring that down a little bit, and look, imagine a tie. Going to my son's wedding in a couple of weeks. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have to wear a tie. But yeah, it's there's a normalization, and I think everyone's understanding how we're trying to develop this platform, and potentially, getting down to that consumer level, if we can ever partner and bring what we do to them, is really going to probably be one of the only ways we can do it effectively.
Yeah, I agreed. And it's a shared ethos. And as you both know, Print Island really was created to bring that open content platform to the whole industry, around the world, in every time zone. In fact, I think there's only Antarctica that we don't have a representation, but I'm pretty sure they don't print there. So I'll not worry too much about that one. But it is something, I think, that will continue. I don't think there is a question and an answer here. There's a question, certainly, and a multitude of ways in which that question can be answered. And on that very basis, and the reason I grabbed you both here to the top of the lighthouse today, is to see the world from a different perspective. So from where you sit today, what do you see? What do you see in the industry? What do you see coming down the tracks over the next 12, 18 months?
Chris, you want me to go, or?
Sure, go right ahead.
Yeah, and look, I think, Richard, to a certain degree, we've been, from our perspective, we've been talking about a convergent industry model for years and years now, right? I think the first time, we started talking about it and put out some research was in 2017 around what's happening in the general segmentation of the market. It was really the underpinning of, should we or should we not migrate to something like Printing United Expo that is a multi-segment show, because heretofore that had never happened here in the States, at least. Drupa was a little bit of that model, and they certainly touch on a lot of areas. Don't have promo, don't have apparel, they don't have some of the areas that we include. But we always kind of looked at that and said, well, it's ink on something, on some substrate, or whether it's a t-shirt, whether it's paper, whether it's plastic, it doesn't really matter. Okay, it is printing technology, and that's what we should show. So we've been talking about convergence. We've sort of wrapped our heads around it. We've made it the underpinning. And I can really see now, because as Chris talked about, the democratization of some of the digital equipment and the speed to market and the adoption into some of the new, application segments, it's easier to get into now. So that's speeding this process up. We look at, always think of it as a Venn diagram, right? Where commercial printers and sign and wide format folks never touched. Commercial people have adopted up to 50% now have wide format solutions on the floor. Okay, so that's a use case where those Venn diagrams, those two circles are crossed over each other half. And we see that commercial people are really looking to label. They're looking at other areas that are potentially growth areas for them, and so we've provided that platform that, like I said, it's been an underpinning not only, and there's reasons for the alliance to have that multi-segment approach. We could talk about our governmental the perspective about how we're trying to pull the industry together to have sort of punch at our own weight, if you will, up on the hill, and that's sort of a whole separate thing. But the idea that we can do this, I do see that happening now in other areas. Okay, some other shows just announced, hey, we're not just this segment, we're now this, and this. Okay, so it is unsustainable to a certain degree, I think, to be solely one segment because of the crossover and the speed for which the equipment now runs. It is, you're going to continue to have consolidation. Okay, I think on the printer side. Okay, so it's really important, especially as we think about it. Chris had mentioned it earlier. When we invite our attendees to come, if you're a commercial printer, we're providing you a world of experience. Want to look at signs? You want to look at every application? You want to get into apparel decoration? We've had commercial people come and say, go on our tours, I want to do this. I want to buy all this equipment. Forget it. I'll just buy an apparel company. Okay, because they want to get into it, right? So they, it's a build or buy situation sometimes, but they're understanding the kind of markup and and profitability they can have in other segments and are migrating in that direction. So it's been an underpinning of ours. I can see it now happening. I think it's going to continue to happen, as we move along and consolidation continues to happen. But Chris, I don't know if you want to add any color to that.
Look, our job is to fuel that, right? I 100% agree with everything that Mark is saying. Those are the forces, right, that are driving. We used to say when I was selling equipment, the trend is your friend, right? So you're either buying through fear because everybody else is now going to have something you don't, or you're buying through opportunity because you want to get an advantage in the marketplace. And I think a lot of people love that crossroad because that is when you make difficult decisions in your business. I'm going to go into apparel, I'm going to go into commercial, or I'm going to go into folding curtains. My team's job in particular, and let's talk about what we've done operationally with what Mark has dreamed up together with Ford and built Printing United Expo. So when it was shifted over to us, operationally, my job was to put fuel in the tank. So we literally dressed down the expo and all of the people who help us produce it. Everything that costs money or there's something you have to pay for to be part of the experience, we tore it down. We went through everything. Is this necessary? Is that necessary? We went through electric. We went through freight handling. We went through recycling, trash, like carpet. We tore everything apart and rebuilt the cost structure. I can guarantee you that we are one, if not the only show in the world of this scope that is containing costs and actually driving down freight costs. We know that equipment and that energy that comes with seeing applications produced on a floor is paramount to the experience of coming to something. Talking about it and seeing a sample coming out of a briefcase is nice. Seeing it produced, is why we're all in this industry. And we have to enable that, not disable that. And we've seen a lot of people do their ROI calculations on where they should come to a show, whether they're coming from Europe or they're domestic suppliers or they're coming from the Far East. They all have to worry about, and I think it's become the only thing they worry about is how much does it cost me to get it on a ship, in a truck, across the floor, installed. There's going to be a lot of news coming from us over the next, as you asked me, 12 to 18 months, that we are way ahead of where others are because we're a member-driven organization. The value that we respect is different than the value that some other organizations do. Even this year, we've dropped, I think drayage on equipment has dropped by 30%. We weren't able to really announce it when people were making their plans last year because we were in due diligence trying to get those costs down. So, that's going to continue. We're going to try to arrest as much as we possibly can lease charges. Our job operationally is to provide the most efficient experience that we can, so that we can continue to serve both sides of the fence.
I like that. And the ROI, of course, that you mentioned in the world that we're in, and let's be honest, and we won't talk about it today because everybody does, the headwinds, shall we say, that everybody's experiencing at the moment. That ROI, if you're not careful, is a risk of inaction. And I think sometimes if you stand still in this world, you're going backwards in real terms. So one of the things that I'm really looking forward to, it's my first time coming to Printing United as well this year, is seeing this in action, because it's very easy, isn't it, to write off what you think something is without ever having been to it. And that's human nature, and not helped by social media and all the constructs that the angry end of the internet will have you believe. But I'm genuinely looking forward to it. I'm really loving what you guys are saying to me today as well, in terms of the direction of travel.
Everybody is coming to the show, right? Because there really is something for everyone to get from it. Some of them are equipment suppliers or substrate suppliers, and they're coming because they need to be there in order to take care of the clients that they know and take care of the clients that they don't know, for the net new opportunities. But if I think about the printers that are coming, I know a printer who does nothing but mail, and he realizes that he has too many eggs in one basket, and he's going to look at his equipment, he's going to look at applications, and he's going to see what area he can grow in. I already told him he should be growing into this. Promotional products and decoration, print and decoration on promotional products is a huge business. Back to your growth for 12 to 18 months. Next year we're partnering with a company called ASI, Advertising Specialty Industries, and that their entire model is based on the promotional products industry. Now they only think about the drinkware. When I look at a drinkware, I'm looking about how the branding was done on the drinkware, right? So now we're finally marrying these two ecosystems together. And that's just one way that we're going to continue to find success in this community gathering, because we're trying to pull all these pockets into common conversations. So, if you ask me what that number one word is, it's success. You're either finding it or delivering it.
And Mark, we just all realised how big your house is if it takes that long to go and find you.
Well, if I could be the greatest distance away from where that plug was, that exactly is where it is. But yeah, who knew my Surface would only give me 40 minutes of battery time. So
there we go.
Yeah. So okay, so you're looking for the word. I think the word for me is collaborative, right? So I think there's a lot of different folks coming. I think about the scale of the show is pretty significant, right? I mean, just from a nuts and bolts perspective, 1 million square feet gross, 800 exhibitors, up to 30,000 attendees, but 40 media companies, dozens of associations, partnerships across the floor. I was talking with Tech Now, a friend in the industry had moved over there, Tanya Powers, and she was with Canon before. And they're partnering with Canon and Ricoh and HP and others on the floor to doing some of the finishing work. The rolls are going to be printed over there. They're going to bring them over to Tech Now's booth. There's just a lot of, I think, collaboration is as we look collaboratively looking to drive success. So I'm going to find my way to Chris's answer, but I'm going to do it through the way that we're all working on a single platform or provided a single platform. We don't think about this as our show. We think about this as the industry show. Okay. And how can everyone, Ford uses the word wet their beak sometimes, but how can everyone have some level of success at our industry? If it's, TLMI showing up and trying to sign up members, awesome. Okay. We think that you guys should join every, trade industry that makes sense to you. And so we're working across, from, like Chris said, the designers and the brands and the printers and the OEMs in that, collaborative area, thinking about the color, right? And G7 and G7 Plus. So to me, I think it's a very collaborative effort. It's a very collaborative effort across departments. Chris actually drove this internally this year, and I'd never looked at it this way, but he's really right, where I always called it the Expo team. I was leading out on the Expo team. He's like, no, the whole alliance is the Expo team. These people just happen to do this part, and these people do this part, and editorial does that part. And it's really so that there's a collaboration that starts internally with us, and it just goes right through the show on an open platform, and we want everyone to have success. So that's, you know,
That's not a bad starting point, is it really, gentlemen? So, and listen, thank you both for taking the time today. Thank you, Mark, for allowing us to inspect your lawn while you went on camera. So that was a pleasure. You'll see that bit when you watch this back, so that's fine too.
Awesome.
But I'm genuinely.
A nice day here in Philadelphia, so you got to take advantage if you can get outside.
Absolutely. Listen, I'm looking forward to seeing you both in October down in Orlando. I'm guessing you'll have organised the weather, so that's pretty much nailed on. So we hope. But thank you for today for joining me on Print Island at the top of the lighthouse. I hope you've enjoyed the view. I hope you like what it is that we're trying to do with Print Island, because I think we are 100% aligned in that with regard to what you guys are doing as well. So for now, Mark Subers, Chris Curran, thank you very much for being on Print Island.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Richard. Take care.